Why can't Christians work this out on their own? Why do we need a reconciliation ministry? Well, that question rises whenever two believers quietly avoid each other across a sanctuary, or when a holiday gathering grows tense at the mention of certain names, or when a married couple sits on the opposite end of a couch because too much has gone unsaid. We assume that because Christians love Jesus and know Scripture and pray, reconciliation should simply happen. It should be natural. It should be easy. But anyone who has lived in the real world of relationships knows the truth. Reconciliation is neither simple nor automatic. It is holy work, and holy work often requires help. Because for many believers, the gap between knowing what Jesus commands and knowing how to obey him feels overwhelming. They're not resisting, they're not stubborn, they simply are afraid of doing it wrong, afraid of saying too much or too little or the wrong thing altogether. And the fear is intensified by a question most won't say out loud. If I get this wrong, will I make things worse? A reconciliation ministry doesn't replace obedience. It doesn't remove responsibility. What it does is help believers walk into obedience without causing more harm than healing. It provides the guidance most Christians never received and the clarity that they long for but rarely admit. This becomes especially vivid when we reach Matthew 5. Picture yourself in worship. The music is swelling, hands lifted, heart exposed before the Lord, when suddenly a face comes to mind. Someone who has something against you, someone you hurt, dismissed, misunderstood, or simply failed to consider. The command Jesus gives is startling in its simplicity. Leave your gift. Go. Be reconciled. He doesn't say finish the song, wait for a calmer moment, or tell yourself you'll handle it later. He invites you to move forward with the other person immediately. But as soon as that call lands, the questions come rushing in. How do I begin? What exactly should I confess? What if my confession reveals something they never noticed? What if naming the wound intensifies it? What if my attempt to make things right somehow makes things worse? In those moments, even sincere Scripture-loving Christians don't lack willingness, they lack direction. And a reconciliation ministry exists to walk with them into that obedience, not to do it for them, but to help them do it faithfully. But Scripture doesn't only speak to the offender. Matthew 18 meets the believer who carries the wound. Maybe someone spoke unfairly about you, dismissed you, judged you, or betrayed your trust. And Jesus says something we rarely expect. Go to them. Speak the truth. Bring the wound to light, not with harshness, but with courage shaped by love. And again, the fear rises. What if they deny it? What if they defend themselves? And what if I'm misreading the whole situation? What if addressing the pain hurts more than leaving it alone? Most Christians know Matthew 5 and Matthew 18, but knowing Scripture is not the same thing as knowing how to embody Scripture in emotionally charged conversations. Whether you are the one who caused the harm or the one who carries it, both situations leave believers asking the same question. How do I obey Jesus without making things worse? And that question is exactly where a reconciliation ministry needs to step in. But beneath both commandments lies another reality, one we often feel long before we can name it. We are frequently blind to our own sin, not because we intend to be, and not because we're manipulative or hard-hearted, just because we're human. We remember exactly how they spoke to us, but struggle to recall our own tone. We can quote their timing perfectly, but not our own. We replay their words again and again, but rarely examine our own contribution with the same energy. Well, hi. If we haven't met yet, my name is Dwight Schettler, and I serve as president of Ambassadors of Reconciliation, where we help people reconcile according to the Bible. If you're interested in more information, I encourage you to join a group that we're starting called Ambassadors of Reconciliation. There's a link in the description below, and there you can get access to tons of free content about how to reconcile according to the Bible. This blindness is one of the primary reasons reconciliation breaks down. We do not see what we do not see, and without help, we rarely ever do. A reconciliation ministry enters here, gently but truthfully, holding up a mirror, not to shame us, but to help us understand ourselves and the story more clearly. But without the cross, reconciliation becomes either self-justification or forced forgiveness. And that is why the narrative must shift here, because a biblical reconciliation ministry does something far deeper than facilitate conversations. It brings people to the cross. When two believers step into a reconciliation process, it may look like they're walking toward each other. But in the truest sense, they are walking toward Christ, toward the place where truth can be spoken without exaggeration and mercy can be offered without limit. At the cross, the law speaks first. It tells the truth about what actually happened, not the softened version we prefer, and not the exaggerated version we rehearse, but the real motives, the real words, the real wounds. The law levels the ground by reminding us that no one stands righteous by nature. But the law alone cannot heal. Into that cleared and honest space, the gospel enters with a louder voice. It tells the offender, you can confess without fear because Christ bore your guilt. It tells the wounded, you can forgive because Christ forgave you first. It tells both, you are not defined by this conflict. You are defined by my mercy. This is the heart of reconciliation. Not two sinners meeting halfway, but two sinners meeting Christ at the foot of the cross. Imagine it, two people carrying different wounds and different sins approaching Calvary from different directions. They kneel on the same blood-soaked ground, and in that kneeling, the distance between them begins to shrink. The offender finds cleansing where they expected condemnation. The wounded finds healing where they expected hardness. Both rise changed, not perfectly and not instantly, but truly. The offender rises humble, the wounded rises softened. Both rise covered by the same grace. This is why a reconciliation ministry matters. It guides people to the only place where reconciliation is actually possible. Not the table of negotiation, but the foot of the cross. And when people walk this path, something beautiful begins to grow. Reconciliation doesn't merely return a relationship to what it once was, it creates something new. Marriages long strained by miscommunication learn to speak truthfully. Friendships fractured by misunderstanding discover empathy. Churches once unsettled by quiet tension learn to walk in confession, forgiveness, and peace that doesn't evaporate when pressure comes. God does not simply repair our relationships. He transforms them. Conflict becomes the soil where humility grows, where patience deepens, and where wisdom begins to flourish. Reconciliation becomes one of the most powerful forms of discipleship. So if you find yourself in a conflict today, whether you caused the offense or carry the wound, begin with this simple prayer. Jesus, lead me back to the cross first, because every true reconciliation begins there. And let me leave you with one sentence to hold on to. Reconciliation is not about winning the conversation. It's about meeting Christ together in the truth. The God who reconciled you to himself through Christ is able to restore what sin has damaged, heal the fear that was broken, and give peace where there was only pain, because Christ himself is your peace. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.